Exhausting routine depended less on number of stories and more on stories with extensive detail.
Covering this was a tedious situation. Now, we at the Denver Post, we have a team of reporters that covered, and as far as what went on in the courtroom, there were 4 of us that alternated. And it was that kind of story. It left you drained. If one person to do the thing was just unbelievable.
John, you know how we have Channel 3, Channel 10, and Channel 13? Mm-hmm. There's somebody from Sacramento here. One of the news people that you see on the news, one of them are here. There's people from all over the country, all over the world here. This is big news.
Closing arguments began well ahead of expectations, less than 2 months after the trial began. And with crews once again parachuting into town, media watching became a spectator sport.
It's crazy. I'm here with my dad from California. He just had to come down here and see all this.
Very controlled, very disciplined, very restrained. Yeah. Very well organized.
Were you happy the way your closings went, Mr. Jones? Were you happy the way the closings went for you and your team?
I thought that we did the absolute best that we could under the circumstances and evidence before us.
Both the defense and prosecution quickly wrapped up closing arguments. Anticipation for a verdict attracted the trial's biggest media crowd to date. It took 23.5 hours for the jury to agree on a verdict. And on June 2nd, Timothy McVeigh's fate was at hand.
It is almost very difficult to stand here and to wait. I started thinking about what we'd talk about going up to the thing this morning, and it really choked me up to go back and start talking about some of the stuff from April 19th of '95. And while I'm here to report and objectively cover this issue on a personal basis, I will be very grateful if there's a guilty verdict after what I experienced in Oklahoma City in '95.
30-minute warning. I'm standing in front of the courthouse in downtown Denver on Stout Street, and already the family members have lined up, people wanting to get into the courtroom to hear what the jury verdict will be. Larry?
With pride and pressure driving every journalist at the courthouse, the bullpen became crowded. And when Tim McVeigh was declared guilty, the subsequent arrival of victims and attorneys resulted in one of the few times that competition got a little out of hand.
For the first time, I realized that, wow, this is what people talk about. This is what they say about the media. This is where we rate with lawyers and car salesmen. This is what they don't like. I saw people pushing, shoving, pulling victims' arms, and it bothered me. It bothered me that I was part of that. But then I realized also, you know, I have a job to do. I've got to report the story. I have to go get these interviews.
And I'm one that believes you never have total closure if you love the one that was killed.
I had my fingers crossed so tight I thought I was going to break them. Shaking, just praying, everything. It was a joyous day. It's something that we've been waiting a long time for.
And this is really almost like the air being let out of a balloon after all these hours of people waiting for a verdict.
With McVeigh guilty, the sentencing phase of the trial took another 2 weeks, and the prosecution wanted death.
I'm Terry Watkins in Denver. The prosecution is rested. The defense has begun its attempt to save the life of Timothy McVeigh.
I'm pleading for my son's life, and I hope and pray God helps you. Those the sobbing words of Timothy McVeigh's mother addressing the jury.
This is, after all, the same jury that convicted Tim McVeigh on 11 counts, any one of which carries a potential death penalty. That took them 4 days, less than 11 hours now.
I do know that this jury has been able to reach a verdict on the sentence, so there is no hung jury situation.
Did he cause severe emotional injury?
Did he cause severe emotional injury?
The answer is yes.
The answer is
Timothy McVeigh. Death.
So he is accepting the recommendation of the jury for death. Mr. McVeigh has just been excused from the courtroom. The words of Judge Richard Mage being transferred to us.
Judge Richard Mage accepted the verdict, telling jurors they did not have to talk about their decision. But reporters were waiting as jurors returned home. And jury foreman Jim Osgood followed the advice of media-savvy friends, arranging a full jury press conference to satisfy the voracious appetite for information.
The physical evidence was so compelling and so convincing from beginning to end, it became very apparent to me in the final analysis that guilt was the only verdict.
Well, I had 6 trucks parked out in front of my house for 2 days waiting for me to come home. So I spent 2 days hiding out at a friend's house because, number one, I was emotionally drained. Number two, I was physically exhausted. And number three, I guess I I didn't know how to handle the media, given that I was so exhausted from the process and the drain that the trial took on me personally, that I didn't know how to diffuse the media swarm or the media interest in me.
But I have to tell you, this is as overwhelming as a trial right now.
But we did have an opportunity at the end of the second verdict to collaborate with one another and ask our respective opinions about how we want to handle the media, because we knew there'd be media interest. And we all agreed that in our own time, we wanted to have a unified statement to show how much of a team approach we took in our deliberations, and for all 18 of us, how we worked as a team to arrive at a just verdict.
Osgood believed he was treated well by local crews, newspaper and magazine reporters, but the major networks were a different story.
I had a very positive experience, actually a set of very positive experiences with certain members of the press, where they actually respected my privacy and were very cordial and genuine in their interest, but also respected my privacy. But there are others that it was very apparent that they wanted the news bite, they wanted to get the scoop, they wanted to be first on air, and they were willing to say anything to get that news bite. And I couldn't help but think less of those individuals because it was so transparent to me, that I saw their motives being ingenuine.
Though some experiences with the media weren't positive, the jury's unanimous and seemingly conflict-free decisions about McVeigh's guilt provided a complete and clean ending to the first trial. McVeigh was on his way to death row, and media interest began to fade. Expansive off-site staging and newsroom facilities were either taken down or dramatically reduced. The Nichols trial began on September 30th and took more than a month. Despite an early surge of coverage, this case would not be covered with the same intensity as the McVeigh case.
Well, I think clearly by the lack of interest in the Nichols trial, the public got plenty and got it early. And I think when the McVeigh trial ended, nobody really cared about Terry Nichols. I mean, they got the trigger guy, and this other guy is also nebulous, and I think they were ready to move on. The public was ready to move on.
Despite the reduced interest, most major media organizations were still represented as the Nichols case progressed. Rules for the media stayed the same, but this time neither the prosecution nor lead defense attorney Michael Tiger made regular statements. Fewer victims were on hand, and much of the information was repetitive until the verdict was near.
Defense lawyer Michael Tiger told jurors 168 people died in Oklahoma City. We've never denied that. And ended with an emotional appeal, putting his hands on Nichols and saying, "This is my brother. He's in your hands."
Once closing arguments finished, the wait began. It took almost a week, and the threat of extending into the Christmas holiday for the jury to declare Terry Nichols guilty of manslaughter and conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction. The verdict wasn't nearly as clear a victory as the prosecution had hoped for, and that meant the jury's decision on a sentence would not be easy.
The jury has been out now, after those closing remarks, for the last 3 days now, deliberating on whether or not they want Nichols to be punished by death or a life sentence.
Many of the family members have told me that they are hoping for the death penalty. Not all of them, of course. Some would be happy with a life sentence.
They will probably make a decision tomorrow morning. They came in late tonight and asked the judge 3 questions. The judge responded to 2 of them. He'll respond to the other one tomorrow morning.
So first thing in the morning, jurors will get their answer. An answer that could very well determine Terry Nichols' fate.
He had some interesting quotes as he finally dismissed the jury. He said, "I am not going to require you to go further. I am, in short, going to discharge you."
This time, the jury was not able to agree on a sentence, so Judge Meach excused them with plans to make the decision himself. This transfer of responsibility ruled out a death penalty, and the only juror willing to talk extensively was foreman Nikki Deutschman, who faced a huge swarm for more than an hour.
I think government's attitude, and the FBI is definitely included in that, is part of where all of this comes from in the first place. There are a fair number of people out there who are pretty unhappy with the government and feel unsafe and very suspicious and in many cases very angry with the government. And so many far-right groups show that there are a lot of people who have some feelings along those lines.
Deutschman's negative comments about the government were controversial, and in one final group press conference, Victims of the bombing used the media to express their disappointment in the jury. So the Terry Nichols